Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Continuing with the theme of body and spirit, we find a huge conflict in our minds when it comes to the understanding and appreciation of God. You see, when we ask our hearts deep within, how ought God to be like? The answer comes without discrimination. Absolute love, absolute compassion, mercy, tolerance, forbearance, foregoing, kindness to the level we have not seen. And when we talk of God in that manner, it touches hearts. People are drawn to God as if they feel that, yes, I don't need anybody to tell me this. My inner being yields to this understanding of God, that if there is a God, He has to be the most splendid, the most perfect, the most beautiful. Why can God not be otherwise? Vengeful, jealous, angry, intolerant? The heart will say, these are the states of insecurity. These are states of someone who is lacking. But God does not lack in anything. As the Imam supplicates and says, "O Allah, give me that which after giving you do not lose anything. Give me forgiveness. Spare me that which after sparing you do not lose anything. Spare me your wrath." Well, that's the sort of God the heart yields to. But this is very different God to the one within scriptures, the one taught in religion. A very intolerant God, a very biased God, discriminatory God, a God who gets offended, a God who has enemies. And I remember back in the day, my biggest struggle used to be, God, how can you have enemies? It's my human frailty that I have enemies. And throughout my life, I'm trying to relieve my heart of having ill feelings towards anybody. I would rather embrace my enemy and let go of that inadequacy within me. But you, God, how can you have enemy? I mean, you read the verse that says to the Prophet that do not pray for these people, the hypocrites of Medina, when Prophet felt for them and sought forgiveness. Do not pray for them. Even if you pray for them 70 times, God will not forgive them, or they will not be forgiven. And then you think, no, how is that possible that the Prophet is kinder than God? And then, of course, you have that narration attributed to the Prophet, at least within the Sunni sources, in which the Prophet said, if only God were to have told me, or if the Quran were to have instructed me, that if you stand there and seek forgiveness 70 times, God will forgive them, I would have stood at every one of their graves. You can see, well, the Prophet is more compassionate than God. This does not make sense. And then, of course, as religious people, we feel we have the right religion and everybody else is not as right as we are. And then we also have this notion that we are the chosen ones. We do have it. Although we often point fingers at the Jewish community and we say to them that, you feel you're the chosen ones as you say you are. And I can't believe in a God that chooses some over others. How can that be God? But yet we believe in the same thing. We are finding this huge conflict. For the most part, we are actually pushing these questions away in the back of our minds because they're so difficult to come to terms with. So we push them away. We don't bring them to the forefront of our minds to actually deal with them, because it is a very frightening position. Either you accept the God that your heart is calling or you accept the God of the scripture. If you accept the God of the heart, you are rejecting the scripture. And that is something that cannot be done. If you accept the God of the scripture, you are denying the heart its truth. So it's a very, very difficult position. The problem here is, again, that we have conflated between the spirit and the body. We are not understanding God in terms of his functions. And it can be explained away quite easily. A child has a father. The father is a parent, responsible for the upbringing of the child and regulating the child's life. The father also teaches at the school where the child attends. The father is also the headmaster of that school. The child enjoys several different relationships with the same person, all from differing aspects. As a father, the child will learn how to behave. The father will reprimand the child. The father will incentivize the child and reward the child for good behavior and bad behavior for the sake of the child. The headmaster will take the student to task for not delivering their side of the commitment. The teacher will impose homework and arduous tasks. The teacher will fail the student. Now the child relates to the teacher in a capacity in which he does not relate to the headmaster. He relates to the headmaster in a capacity that he does not relate to the father. In all these three scenarios, the child's bodily aspects are being regulated. Bodily incentives, bodily threats, be it through the teacher or the headmaster or the father as the parent. But within all of that is a unique relationship of the heart that the child has with the parent, in which the child has utmost confidence that the parent will sacrifice everything for my sake, will forgive me unrestrictedly, does not hold any grudges against me. My success brings more joy to my parent than his own success, and my failure brings more grief to the parent than his own failure. He will sacrifice his life for me without flinching, without even thinking. That is the level of the commitment that the parent has to me. This is how we need to understand Allah. At the level of the heart, He is the God of the heart, the untarnished splendor and beauty, the all-forgiving, the all-loving. He has no enemies. He is too grand to have enemies. How dare we place Iblis, who is nothing, not even a speck of dust, at the level of enemy of God, when God is unequaled, the one that cannot be contained by the heavens and the earth. How can something as meaningless as Iblis stand as an enemy of God? You see, how can a mother, in her blind, passionate love for her children, discriminate in terms of the colors of her children? It's unthinkable. She will take all the blames upon herself to secure goodness for her children. And then you have God, who is supposed to be more compassionate than the mother, as our hearts inform us and Scripture informs us. Yet, He is ready to burn His creatures that He loves more than the mother loves her children. And on top of that, He says, whenever your skins burn, we will give you newer skin so you burn more. And for eternity you burn. We can't make sense of it because we have conflated between a God that regulates the bodies and between a true God that resides within. What we need to understand is that we need to have utmost confidence in God. Utmost confidence. Never to tarnish God with our human frailties. Never to conflate the God who is regulating the bodies with the God that speaks to us from within. Never to convince the heart otherwise. The biggest struggle I have had in my life is to say, well, the scripture is true. What I'm feeling is not true. Finally, I had to abandon this reconciliation and say what my heart feels is true. The scripture has to make sense differently. And indeed, the scripture does make sense differently. But there, what the spirit is yearning is its true self in the form of God. That is the true thing that the spirit is intuiting and understanding. We need to understand carefully and clearly that God is most beautiful. He doesn't have enemies. He can forgive who he wants, and he will reward everybody. According to Sufi literature, there will come a point where God eventually forgives Iblis himself. He is the arch or the greatest enemy according to our bodily condition. But to know, no, I have full confidence in my God. But at the same time, to know that we have to take the God who regulates the bodies seriously as well. The parent is telling me off, but within there is the real parent who loves me and who might even overlook. And we find this with God. And I'm just going to end with this note that Imam Ali in his dua Kumail says, O Lord, forgive me the sins that are inscribed by the two watchers that you've set upon me. And then he says, O Allah, and forgive me those sins that you have concealed from the scribes as well. So the parent within a parent, the parent that regulates the bodies says to the scribes, keep a detailed account. And then there's a parent within the parent that just conceals our crimes and faults from the scribes themselves. That's how we need to reflect upon God in order to awaken and purge ourselves of the bodily. And he becomes the absolute means for our growth. And when there is a conflict between the scripture and the inner intuition, to prefer the inner intuition above the scripture and try and reconcile the scripture through the bodily. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.